So again, welcome to all of you to our First Friday event for April 2023. It is a great pleasure for me to be able to introduce Sidney Greenfield. I met Sidney back in the 1990s when he served as president of what was then called the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness. And I was very intrigued by some of the presentations he was doing about let's say, from my perspective, rather unusual medical procedures involving, if I remember correctly, circular saws and things like that. So it was quite an interesting presentation that he had, which made me very excited when he agreed to be available today. In addition to serving as president of Society for Anthropology of Consciousness, he's also served as president of the Senior Anthropology Group. He's been a vice president for the Economic Anthropology section, the Society for the Anthropology of Religion. He is emeritus professor at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And I was very surprised, but actually not surprised to hear when he was talking to me before, that he has been doing field work in Brazil since 1959. That was about when I was knee-high to a Coke bottle. So for you youngins who are here with us, you're not just going to hear an interesting presentation about some of his fieldwork, but you're also going to be able to tap into a great store of wisdom and experience and a big part of anthropological history. Now, Sid has agreed to take questions while he's speaking. In the interests of continuity, I'm going to mute everybody but Sidney while he speaks. If you do have a question, please use the reaction button to raise your hand and we will get to you, or you can put your question in the chat function and I will raise my hand, and then when Sid takes a look and feels it's appropriate for him to interrupt what he's talking about, we'll take the question. Otherwise, we can take questions at the end as well. We have until 1:30, so we have plenty of time. So without any further ado, let me introduce you and turn the stage over to Sidney Greenfield.
Thank you. Thank you. And I would like you to take a look at my shirt. And I'm wearing it especially since it was given to me by my now deceased co-author when he ran for, what it is, translates into look him squarely in the eye. He ran for vice mayor of the city of Fortaleza with the guy who was the candidate for mayor, and this was his slogan. And unfortunately, they lost. My friend is now deceased, and the candidate for mayor who lost is now governor of the state. So things work out interestingly. So let me begin with the paper, A Deceased Doctor Healing the Living in the Enchanted World of the Brazilian Northeast. The theme of this paper is that people in Northeast Brazil refuse to let a person who helped them during their lifetime die. They do this by means of several of the belief systems found in the region. In contrast with the cosmological order of modernity, spirit beings we tend to place in another plane of reality suffuse and have causal efficacy in their world. We begin with an example from one of the several Brazilian world orders. It is the story of Cristina Azevedo, a woman in her mid-30s who at the time of the research lived in the municipality of Maranguape in the northeastern Brazilian state of Ceará. Several years previously, she was interned in the hospital Albanese Sarasate, expecting her third child. On a quiet fall evening, she began to feel contractions that increased in intensity, and she called the nurse, who she asked to summon the doctor. Unknown to Christina, there had been a serious disaster in the center of town earlier in the evening. A bus filled with passengers had collided with an automobile, both going faster than they should have. Several people had been killed, and the many injured had been taken to the hospital, the only one in the area. The single doctor on duty and his small staff worked feverishly and without interruption through the night to do whatever they could to help the victims. Early the following morning, the exhausted doctor remembered that he had left Christina unattended and almost ready to give birth. He ran to her room, where he found her resting comfortably with her newborn in her arms. Surprised, he asked her who had delivered the child. She responded that it had been the doctor. Other members of the staff entered the room. Dr. Antonio responded without thinking, quote, "It couldn't have been. I was the only doctor on duty, and I had been totally preoccupied with the victims of the accident," unquote. One of the nurses then asked the unfazed Christina to describe the doctor who had delivered the baby. Quote, "He was tall and thin, had deep blue eyes, wore glasses, and appeared to be of European, possibly German descent," said the new mother. "He also had a mustache and was very kind," she added. "Everything had gone well." A tired but delighted Christina concluded. Without uttering a word, one of the senior nurses quietly stepped out of the room to return a few minutes later with a picture she had taken from the wall at the entrance of the hospital. "That's him," said a smiling Christina. "Could you please call him? I would like to thank him." The picture was of Dr. Argeo Epster, who had been dead for more than a quarter of a century. An extensive literature on folk or popular saints in Brazil and elsewhere in Latin America tells the story of individuals who are regularly turned to after their death by local people who treat them similarly to the way they do saints officially recognized by the Roman Catholic Church. Some over time become part of the church's official pantheon. These are exemplary people who have helped their neighbors during life, who are kept alive after their death so they may continue to provide aid to those in need of their assistance. Brazilians are unusual among contemporary people with respect to their beliefs and practices. The German psychiatrist and philosopher Karl Jaspers dubbed the transformation that took place some 2,500 years ago the axial age. Quote, "The essential change, according to Marshall Solins in his last book before he died, quote, was the translation of divinity from an immanent presence in human activity to a transcendental other world of its own reality, leaving the earth alone to humans, now free to create their own institutions by their own means and lights," unquote. The German sociologist Max Weber proposed the mirrored concepts of enchantment and disenchantment to refer to this opposition between the modern world and its institutions and the way humans lived previously in their many diverse cultures. Earlier periods prior to the transformation of the axial age were characterized by the predominant influence of an array of otherworldly beings that had efficacy in the life of the living in the material world. Contemporary people, for the most part, have turned their backs on the presence of non-humans in their world and claim agency over and assume responsibility for life in the here and now. Modern religions place these other beings in this other world and believe that by means of science, rational people can control the national world that they alone inhabit. We may pray to God, for example, but are considered naive if we really expect God to be present to solve our problems. Instead, although we may beseech the supernatural, we expect human agents, such as medical doctors, for example, to cure us of our aches and pains. In Brazil, this is not always the case. In most respects, Brazil is a modern nation. It has the 9th largest economy in the world. With respect to healthcare, a central aspect of this paper, it has first-rate medical schools, scientific laboratories, well-trained professionals, and a system of universal healthcare. Despite this, many Brazilians regularly turn to supernatural beings, of which saints, officially recognized or not, are but one example appealed to for help in healing the numerous illnesses from which people suffer. In this sense, Brazilians are not fully disenchanted, but straddle a line in which entities in the other world are invoked to do for them what science and the institutions of the modern world are unable to accomplish. Otherworldly beings in our frames of understanding can enter their world to help them and then return to the other domain. Brazil has several diverse religious traditions that compete for followers. Which religion one affiliates with at any point in time most often is determined by the success a person has in having their problems resolved by the entities of one of them. The dominant pattern for the relationship between the living in need and the beings in the other world whose help is requested is to be found in popular or folk Catholicism. Students of Brazilian religions use the term popular or folk to distinguish these beliefs and practices from official Catholicism that until recently was the one with which most of the population affiliated. In the enchanted world of popular Catholicism, individuals regularly appeal to the saints for their help with practical matters. God is believed to have elevated these living beings who led exemplary lives to heaven to assist him. The living may approach God through one of the saints who may be thought of as intermediaries between living humans and God. Those in need may do this by making a vow or promesa, in which they offer the saint something if and only if he or she provides them with what they request. The conditionality is because saints do not always come through. When they don't, the petitioner is not obligated to fulfill their part of the bargain. When this happens, the petitioner is free to turn to another saint or to the mystical entities of one of the other religions. In this way, individual Brazilians may move from one religion to another over the course of their lifetime. This paper offers stories about Dr. Argeo Ebster, a man who devoted his life to helping people as a medical doctor. After his death in 1977, his neighbors continued to request and receive the help he provided to many, such as Cristina Azevedo, in life. Argeo Ebster was born in the municipality of Maranguape in 1911 to descendants of German immigrants who had settled there in the previous century and had prospered. He attended a local primary school and then a collegio, also in the municipality. After graduating, he left home, as was the custom for bright young men from elite families in the Brazilian Northeast at the time. He went to the then national capital of Rio de Janeiro to continue his studies. He is reported to have intended to specialize in engineering. Instead, after taking the entrance exam in medicine and receiving the highest grade, he went to medical school. On completing his residency, Dr. Argeo Epster returned to Maranguape and took a position at a local medical clinic. He married, raised 2 sons, and spent the rest of his life treating patients in his home city and its surrounding area. In the 1960s and 1970s, the doctor's family was the dominant force in municipal politics. His wife's brother, perhaps his closest friend, was elected mayor on 2 occasions. Other family members became state legislators, and an intimate friend was elected federal senator. Argeo, in spite of coaxing, chose not to run for public office. Instead, as those in opposition parties told us, he preferred to do his politicking with his patients. Several of his former patients reported that he spent considerable time chatting with them, as he did with all he attended. This endeared him with his patients, especially the poor. Large crowds are reported to have been kept waiting outside his office while he chatted leisurely with them in turn about politics, world affairs, their families, their hopes, aspirations, and other things unrelated to their medical condition. His favorite topic, especially during election season, was politics. The doctor, we are told, was not adverse to instructing his patients, sometimes quite emphatically, whom they should vote for. One of the rewards he received through the friends and kinsmen he helped elect were the funds to build the hospital where Cristina Azevedo delivered her baby. State and federal representatives in Brazil have access to designated money they may apply to projects in places of their choice. No one questioned the decision to construct a much-needed hospital to be directed by a gifted doctor who happened to have campaigned for the public officials that arranged the funds. When we visited the Epster home to interview Argeo's widow, his sons, and other relatives, we passed the cemetery where the doctor was buried. To our surprise, there were people on their knees praying as they placed flowers and small objects on the grave. This reminded us of the pilgrims we met in an earlier research project at the shrine of St. Francis of Assisi in the municipality of Canindé, also in the state of Ceará. Some of the objects placed at Dr. Argeo's graves were ex votos, symbolic representatives of the part of the body where the pain is located that led the sufferer to the saint and now the deceased doctor. In the pattern already described, a person who experiences discomfort petitions a saint for help. The request contains a proposal of something the saint is believed to want. The offer is fulfilled only if the otherworldly being first helps the petitioner obtain what is asked for. Brazil has a system of universal health care, and everyone has access to medical personnel when they experience the symptoms of illness. The very large number of Brazilians who turn to alternative sources of healing represents not a criticism of the healthcare system, but rather to the limits to what medical science is able to accomplish. An example of this is one of the women we interviewed at Dr. Argeo's grave. She told us that when in labor with her only son, she experienced considerable difficulty. The pain was so intense that even though she was in the hospital, Maria José feared she would die before giving birth. She made a vow to Dr. Argeo, asking him to help her with the delivery, as when alive he had helped her mother when she was born. She promised that if she survived and a child was born healthy, she would visit the doctor's grave, say prayers to him, and adorn his grave with flowers. She also promised to name the child Argeo after him, if it were a boy. Before we left, Maria José introduced us to a shy 4-year-old Argeo who had accompanied his mother to her visit to the cemetery. When news of his death became known, the initial reaction of many in Syrah and elsewhere in the Northeast who accept this view of the universe was that Argeo Ebster's lifelong dedication to the poor and the sick reminded them of others who had been elevated to sainthood by the church. There was another side to Dr. Argeo, however, that contrasts with the Catholic image of sainthood presented above. Some we interviewed, including former patients, spoke of him as a believer in the esoteric. They reported that once a week he went to Fortaleza to attend Cardus' Spiritus sessions. They said that he used hypnotism in treating patients, and books by Allan Kardec were found in his library. It appears that the doctor had ties to both Catholicism and Spiritism. The story of Lydia Coutinho provides an example of the now deceased doctor being part of both magical worlds. Lydia met her husband, Mario, when both were students at the university. After graduating, Mario obtained a job that paid well and that he enjoyed. The couple and their families were very happy, except for the fact that after 7 years of marriage, Lydia had not borne a child. Wanting very much to have a family, the couple went to a number of doctors but had no success. Lydia's mother told her about Dr. Argeo, who helped her through several difficult pregnancies. Familiar with folk Catholic tradition that she did not fully reject even after graduating from the university, Lydia made a vow to the deceased doctor. Sadly, after a year passed, she had no success. Becoming desperate as the years passed, she discussed her problem with her female friends. One suggested that she visit a Cardus center and speak with Alfredo, a medium who had helped several of her other friends. Lydia wrote down the address of the center and discussed the matter with a skeptical Mario, who reluctantly agreed to accompany her. The following evening, both participated in a ritual during which possible vengeful spirits preventing Lydia from becoming present were dispatched by means of a ritual called a disobsession. The medium then incorporated the spirit of a deceased doctor who told her to stop taking any medications prescribed by all of the doctors who had treated her. In their place, the spirit mentioned one for Lydia to take, assuring her that soon she would become pregnant. 3 months later, she was. The name of the spirit the medium received was Argeo Ebster. Although raised as Roman Catholics, the couple soon became active in sessions of the Cardus Center, where they participated in the charitable activities that are at the core of the religion's beliefs. Brazil's earliest settlers brought the beliefs and practices today known as popular Catholicism prior to the Protestant Reformation and the Catholic Counter-Reformation. This tradition then was syncretized with those brought separately by the slaves from their African homelands to form candomblés, Xangos, and other Afro-Brazilian religious traditions. In contrast, Cardus's Spiritism came to Brazil from France in the second half of the 19th century, brought by elites. Later, other segments of the population adopted it. Cardus's Spiritism was a codification of beliefs that first came to Europe from the United States, where it was known as spiritualism. A French school teacher and intellectual who wrote under the pseudonym of Allan Kardec assembled the beliefs and called it Spiritism to differentiate it from what appeared in the United States. What the codifier, as he is known in Brazil, proposed was a reformulation of the Judeo-Christian tradition. When the universe was created, according to Kardec, God made not one, but two worlds. One was the material with which we are familiar, and the other the domain of the spirits. Like American spiritualists, Kardec's followers believed that communication is possible between the living and the dead. In Brazil, after Kardecists encountered practitioners of the African tradition, in which the deities incorporate in the bodies of believers, physical interaction between the two planes was added. Examples are the mediums I wrote about and discussed at previous meetings of the Anthropology of Consciousness, who received the ubiquitous Dr. Fritz, the spirit of a deceased doctor who, through the bodies of a variety of mediums, does surgeries, actually cuts into patients with anything from a surgical scalpel to a rusty knife to an electric saw, without the use of anesthesia or antisepsis, in which the patients feel no pain, do not develop infections, and recover. Spirits, according to Kardec, are the dominant agents of the creation. God is said to have given them moral purpose, and with it, the mission of each achieving its own ethical perfection. To accomplish this, they move from the spiritual to the material world and back in a series of incarnations. In each lifetime, a spirit is exposed to what may be thought of as a series of lessons that, if learned, enable them to move forward on their path to perfection. At the end of each lifetime, they return to the spirit world to prepare for additional incarnations, during which they will confront further lessons in a transactional process that will end only after the spirit has achieved moral perfection. Spirits, however, have free will. They may choose not to acknowledge the lesson they have incarnated to learn. The belief system acknowledges that material circumstances may prevent some individuals from learning the lessons that were the purpose of an incarnation. Poverty, illiteracy, illness, and other misfortunes may make it difficult, if not impossible, for some to recognize their place in the cosmic order and to behave in ways that are in their best interest. To help these unfortunate beings, Spiritism has taken the giving of charity as its raison d'etre. Quote, "Without charity, there is no salvation," unquote. Kardec titled the widely quoted chapter 15 of his interpretation of the Christian gospel. Treating the sick gratis is perhaps the most important form Spiritist charity takes. Sickness is understood to be a dysfunction in the working of the physical body. It may be caused by forces in the material world, such as bacteria and viruses, in the spirit world, or a combination of both. Kardecists accept the teachings of medical science and all science for understanding the material world. They do go to doctors when an illness has physical causes, but they believe that many bodily dysfunctions may be carried over from a past life or may be caused by forces emanating from the other domain. The living may appeal to what are called enlightened spirits, probably presently in the other world, that may assist them as part of the charity so important to the belief system. Some of these spirits may be motivated to help to atone for actions in previous lifetimes that derailed their spiritual advancement. During several incarnations, for example, they may have chosen not to learn the lessons they have incarnated to master. By performing charity, they may make up for the missed opportunities. Healing the sick is perhaps the most important form of charity used by spirits to compensate for lost opportunities. To help the ever-growing number of people suffering from illnesses that may be preventing them from concentrating on the lessons they have incarnated to learn, spirits who have been trained as physicians or healers in other cultures are believed to have continued their training in the spirit world, attempt to aid them. These spirits select mediums from among the living through whom they feel comfortable working. Brazilian mediums, in turn, have shown a preference for spirits who have been trained and practice medicine in Europe, primarily in Germany. Adolf Fritz is one example. Argeo Ebster, a Brazilian of German descent, is another. An example of the spirit of Dr. Argeo working through a medium to help the living is the case of Maria de Albuquerque, a professor at the Federal University of Ceará. Several years ago, she developed a skin disease that covered her entire body, making it difficult for her to wear clothing. Her skin turned hard and brittle and produced a white powdery substance that fell in mounds on the floor beneath her. She was unable to teach her classes and was embarrassed to appear in public. Ana Maria went to her doctor, who prescribed medications that he changed frequently when the condition did not improve. When nothing he prescribed helped, he sent her to a specialist who asked her to take other pharmaceuticals, but none relieved the pain or improved the situation. After seeing several specialists and what appeared to her to be an eternity later, Ana Maria was in a state of despair. Friends and relatives recommended alternatives to the medical treatment she was receiving. As happens so often in Brazil, when an individual suffers from an illness and finds medical science unable to help, this educated rationalist university professor became open to the magical world of alternative healing. Of the many suggestions she received, one was for her to visit an elderly blind woman, a Kardecist healer medium who lived in humble quarters in a slum at the outskirts of Fortaleza. Ana Maria had never previously been to this part of the city. She believed that only the poor and educated were to be found there. Since nothing had helped her and her condition continued to worsen, the elite professor decided to put her skepticism aside and give it a try. Seated at a small table with Anna Maria and a colleague who had accompanied her, the medium prayed silently as she entered trance. A male voice speaking through her introduced himself as a doctor whose name the nervous visitor did not at first catch. The voice told her to stop taking and throw out all the remedies that the doctor had prescribed. Instead, she should take what he would dictate to the old woman who sat by motionlessly. Anna Maria was to go to the pharmacy, purchase what he prescribed, and follow not the directions on the package, but instead those he would dictate to the medium and who would give them to her. Not sure whether she should do what the spirit advised or continue the treatment prescribed by the medical specialist, the professor decided to return to a family doctor and ask for his advice. His first reaction was to laugh, and he told her not to be foolish. After reflecting for a moment, however, he added, since what he and the specialist had prescribed had not helped, and she was still suffering, I'm sorry about that. She was still suffering. Why not try what the old blind woman told her, adding that she really had little to lose. So the sophisticated academic stopped taking the medications that had proven to be useless, went to the pharmacy, purchased what the spirit medium wrote down, threw out the instructions in the package, and applied the remedy as directed by the medium. Within days, Anna Maria told my co-author she began to feel better. The pain and constant pulling of her flesh gradually diminished. The mounds of powder stopped falling from her body. Little by little, the caking and dryness disappeared. Soon her skin returned to its normal conditions. The mysterious illness was gone and Anna Maria was cured, a cure she attributed not to the medical profession, but to Cardus's spiritism, and especially the elderly blind medium and the spirit doctor whose name was Argeo Epstein. Today, like others helped, Anna Maria frequents a Cardus's center and contributes to the charity. Oh, I'm sorry. And contributes to the charity so important to its belief system. North Americans socialized in the culture of modernity learn from their religions that when someone dies, they go to another place. Although the deceased may dwell in the memories of the living, they no longer are active materially in their lives. In Northeast Brazil, in contrast, even those educated in the beliefs of modernity also participate in an enchanted world in which the entities inhabited continue to affect their lives. In this culture, those who die may continue to do what they did in life, especially if they contributed to the well-being of those around them. In popular Catholicism, they may be treated and even become saints. People who need help they may not get from the institutions of society may petition those no longer alive by making a vow, as did Maria José. This conditional promise will be fulfilled only if the request is satisfied. Should this not happen, the petitioner may turn to another saint or to another religious group, entreating its supernatural beings to the needed help. Carter's Spiritism is one of the multiple other belief systems Brazilians may turn to, as we saw in the examples of Lydia Coutinho and Ana Maria de Albuquerque. Spirits of the dead, such as Argeo Ebsta or Adolf Fritz, working through a medium, can, quote, break the plane modernity has created and be in this world so they may treat the medical conditions of the living. In this way, Brazilians keep alive after death those who help them. Their enchanted world is filled with beings that, when summoned, may do for those in need what the institutions of modernity do not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sid. Very much interesting presentation, very much along the lines of what I know you've been doing your research on for many, many years. At this time, would anybody like to ask questions or engage in a conversation with Sid? Please unmute yourself or raise your hand. Yes, sir.
Ralph de la Cava.
Ralph.
Sid and I have been friends for a good many decades now, even though we met for the first time even decades before those decades. So, I mean, one is an observation which you already hit, and the other is a question. The observation is, of course, is that in Roman Catholicism, you have a lot of these intermediaries who are active on the other side. So if you misplace something, you pray to St. Anthony. If you want to avoid COVID and a cold, you pray to St. Blaise.
Right.
And on and on and on. But you know that already, and you mentioned it, and I was delighted that you did. My question is this, Sid, if I may invoke our friendship. What got you started on the study of mediums? Now, I don't know whether you presented that now, but
when did I start?
Why did you start on that subject? What led you to it? What provoked you?
All right.
To carve out this field?
Okay, let me tell you. When you and I were in Fortaleza in 1981,
right,
visiting professors, before classes started, I was sitting in our apartment reading the newspaper, and a name jumped out at me. It was the name of my godson. But it wasn't my godson. It was another Jose Carlos Ribeiro, who the newspaper article said did the kinds of things that I was talking about. So since classes hadn't started, I said to my wife and to my daughter, what say we go take a look at what this is? Mm-hmm. And we showed up and went in to look at what this guy was doing. And literally, it was mind-blowing. Uh-huh. And we said, well, we have another research project, but no, this seems too fascinating. Let's go ahead with it. That's how I started. And for the next 40 years, this is what I have been doing.
Exactly. Well, that pleases me to know that, because I was completely in the dark. My only association with Spiritists is that when I arrived, I may have met one, and they thought, well, here's an American who will be sympathetic to this. My mother-in-law, who came to the birth of our second child, would go to see them often. And I don't know whether she ever took part in one of these medical emergencies. But in any case, I thought I'm happy you told me. Thank you so much.
And I will tell you, if anybody else is interested, I'm going to give a talk for the senior anthropologists in the beginning of May, and I'm going to go through this history.
Oh, love to hear it.
Anybody else?
Do we have other questions? Claire?
This is not a question, and I have incomplete information. But in Lisbon, in Portugal, if you go up the mountain and you get to the medical school, which is on top of the big hill, right out in front is a large statue inside a fountain of a doctor who taught there until the 1890s, died young, and he's been healing people ever since. Now, what I find fascinating about that is right in front of the biomedical school. And when you go to that fountain, there are people around it right now, all kinds of plaques all over it. Thank you for this, thank you for that. And it's still happening now. It was common in French cathedrals in the 1950s, and it's disappeared from the cathedrals, but it hasn't disappeared in Lisbon from this guy who's still healing people. Well, more than 100 years after his birth. Now, I was just there as a tourist, and so I couldn't follow up on it, but it is somewhat similar to what the story you're telling today, so I wanted to share it.
Well, thank you. You see, I was in Portugal in the 1970s. Before I got into it, I knew nothing about it. I was doing archival research, and I went up there and I looked at it and was completely oblivious. But I'm glad you mentioned it, because my next visit to Portugal, if I get back there, I want to take a look at this and see if I can follow up on it.
Yes, his name is available. You can look his name up, but I didn't do archival study. I'm sure you could get back and get more information and find the people who are protecting his statue and fountain today.
And occasionally what happens in these examples is that enough followers get together and they petition the papacy and go through the whole process and try to create official saintdom.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he's a saint, but he certainly is a healer.
Yeah,
It's fascinating.
Saint.
Thank you for your talk. Very, very interesting.
You're more than welcome.
Do we have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I see Alice has raised her hand.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry that camera's not working, but yeah, as usual. But years ago here in Milwaukee, I had actually a graduate student who was Mexican-American. Family was down on the south side of Milwaukee, big family. And they felt they were having problems as a family, different kinds. And they decided to pay for a spiritual medium to come up from Monterrey in Mexico. And this woman embodied, when she was working as a medium, she embodied a traditional healer in Monterrey at beginning of the 20th century, like around 1900, who was called El Nino, and I blanking on what the first name was. It was just an ordinary Spanish name.
Yes.
And yeah, so she came, and the family all gathered down in Grant Park on the beach on Lake Michigan, and it was March or early April, and it was very cold, the water very cold, but one by one, all the adults in the family and older children waded out and were baptized in Lake Michigan by El Nino and sent back, and then they were supposed to be on the path for prosperity and health. So they all went back to the apartment of one of the family, big gathering, to feast with El Nino, the woman. And there was a banging on the door. They opened the door, and another woman with, and these are all Mexican, you know, Indians. So this woman at the door had another such woman in back of her. And the woman at the door angrily denounced the El Nino woman in the apartment as a fraud, and said she herself was the true of El Nino. And at any rate, my student, who was actually a grad student in his 30s, had been in the Army, looked into it a bit and found there were yet more El Nino mediums down in Monterey. So none of this, I'm sure, has any relationship to the Frenchman that you describe as having started this society in Brazil. This appeared to be, these El Ninos in Monterey appeared to be basically part of the local indigenous tradition, although I haven't followed up on this at all. But it would be interesting to compare all these El Ninos in Monterey and what else was going on in northern Mexico. And there are a lot of mestizo communities there, of course, and a lot of them come to the United States. So just to throw in the phenomenon doesn't necessarily tie into any particular educated European belief system. Thanks.
Alice, if I'm not mistaken, this is the El Nino Silencio.
Yes, that's right.
Remember Phil Singer?
Yeah.
Singer did a documentary. He may have done more than one documentary on this. And what it is, you see, something we don't usually think of, but this Cartesist tradition actually extended all over Latin America and syncretized with indigenous belief systems all over. And this happens to be one of them that also fits in with the Roman popular Catholicism that's also prevalent in parts of Mexico.
Yes,
so
definitely.
The package fits together.
Yes.
Yeah, but thank you for raising it. I had forgotten. I was thinking of Phil for other reasons, and I'll have to go back and look at the documentary again.
We have a question from Dennis and then one from Herbert.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Dennis Weidman. I'm in Miami, Florida. Sid, nice to see you. Sorry, my camera's not working either, so somebody's intervening here in a way that's not making us all truly visible. So this is a voice from, you don't even, another voice coming into our moment here. So Alice's discussion led to this, your comment that this is syncretized with indigenous philosophies in South America also. So in listening to your presentation, I see that it seems to be that almost all the medium relationships are with past humans. And so many Native American, especially Northern Native American peoples, their relationships are with a full diversity of plants and animals, mountains, springs, and so it's much more diverse. but it's not necessarily focused on humans. Humans may be the intermediaries, but it's individuals who have had relationships with those other forces that then becomes the way of people are healed. And so my work is with the Native American church and Pietism. And so that's focused down to a specific plant. And that plant then it becomes a gateway to an altered state. And so individuals can be healed, they believe, through this intermediary of a cactus. So in studying this in a comparative analysis, you know, you've been at this for years. Comparatively, these different cultures, why is this group that you're speaking of is so focused on humans? And do you see the synchronicity with indigenous peoples? Do they expand just away from just the anthropomorphized human to other forces?
Thanks, Dennis. What I was dealing with in the research we did was in areas of what becomes really contemporary Brazil. And that's just the way it worked out in the two traditions that I mentioned. There's a whole slew of indigenous peoples who have worldviews that you're referring to with entities and, you know, all kinds of beings that contribute in the same way that you're mentioning from the ethnography that you're dealing with. I'd like to mention, if those of you present haven't seen it, Marshall Solon's last book before he died is very well worth reading, because essentially what it is a charge against us as anthropologists, the people who dealt with other people, and the fact that we never fully reported this in the sense of the way that people believe in it. And his argument is that essentially that we stood back and said something in effect, well, this is what the natives tell us, and we said it skeptically. And many anthropologists reported it skeptically. And he said, what we have to do is open ourselves to these worlds that you're bringing up, that my Amazonian colleagues tell me about regularly, and all of the others in the other worlds other than our own contemporary modern world. So I thank you for bringing that up.
So let me ask a more specific question. So the groups that you're most familiar with, do they ever stray away from just the human force, you know, or is it just so specific? And you know, it seems like it's something that comes from Europe, the European belief systems and Catholicism, you know, that there needs to be saints and peoples leaving out the natural world. So I'm trying to put a deeper history on this.
Yeah, what essentially happened is in a place like Brazil, where there has been a great push at the national level to become a modern society in the modern world, the worlds of the indigenous peoples were marginalized, just as the indigenous peoples themselves are marginalized. But popular Catholicism and Cardicism, and add to that Pentecostalism, which is the primary evangelical movement that is growing so rapidly. Some are projecting it, the majority of Brazilians, to be evangelicals by mid-century. These are the dominant ones. And what I've been doing for the last 40 years is studying the whole range of these. And again, I'm aware of, but I leave to other people to do the details.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have Herbert and then Paul.
I just have two that started out with one question, but you led me to another one. What is the title of the last Marshall Solins book that you're talking about? Sorry to show my ignorance.
The New Science of Our Enchanted World, or something like that. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, no, that's okay. As long as it begins with the true science, then I.
Yeah.
Secondly, the other was just a question. It seemed, as you were talking, as you were answering Alice, it seemed to me that I came across.
I'm sorry. Give me just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. It seems to me some years ago that I saw traces of this in an exhibition about Cuba and Afro religions and so on, with the name Edson. Maybe Edson is a common name as well, but it also seemed to be connected to a doctor. Is this possible?
Yes. Cuba, it was another area of, as you know, very heavy African influence, and also the Cubans adopted Cardicism also. Again, these are syncretisms of lots of different things, but what I've been talking about appears there. And I had a friend who I was working with a number of years ago, comparing Brazil and Cuba, and there have been lots of comparisons. And so this is another very interesting area for comparative research. Yeah. If I live to be 102, I may be able to get to it.
Just a few years more.
So Paul and then Claire.
Hello, great presentation. I'm sorry that I showed up a little late. I wondered if there had been any study on the efficacy, how effective these medical treatments were. If they were they, other than placebo and nocebo effect, did they have, were these mediums good at healing people?
All right, I hate to do this, but you have to read my book, Spirits with Scalpels.
I just got it on Amazon while you were talking. Yeah.
All right, essentially, yes, it works. It works because, amongst other things, and I get the references in the book, I did a study of follow-up of patients, asking them, what happened to you after being treated by these healers? And most of them indicated that they were helped. One of the things that I've done, I made a documentary on a woman that I followed for 11 years after she had cancer surgery, a breast removal by Dr. Fritz. And, she continued healthy until I stopped being able to follow up with her. On another level that I just barely got into, there are Cardicists in southern Brazil who believe, amongst other things, that they have developed a mechanism, a form of physics, in which they can teleport patients they're treating to the spirit world to be worked on by spiritist doctors, and then brought back through this scientific means. And I spent a long time arguing with them that, look, you can say that this stuff works, but you've got to document it. So one of them has written 5 books that I summarized an article in the Anthropology of Consciousness journal, indicating or documenting the patients and how they recovered from the symptoms that they diagnosed them with at the beginning. So in effect, there's lots of evidence to indicate that this does work. Unfortunately, neither the medical establishment, the psychiatric establishment, or I should add, large numbers of particists themselves who want to get their psychological treatments accepted by the medical profession don't want to go near this kind of stuff because they feel that they'll be laughed out of court, so to speak. So they try not to even acknowledge it.
Wonderful. Thank you. I look forward to reading the book.
Okay. Let me know what you think.
Claire? You're muted.
Yep. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Hi again, and thank you. This is a most wonderful, interesting conversation. I have a couple of responses. I'm writing a book in which I'm comparing 6 different medical systems, and of course I have a method to do that. And they are all presented in very much the same way. But at the end of each chapter, that is to say, we're looking at the inside, how they explain themselves first. Then we're looking at the outside, and that's how outsiders explain them, or comment on them, or do research on them. And inevitably, when you come to the end of the chapter, you've got a gap, what I call a gap. I have to write in a very neutral language. So the gap is between what the people who are practicing the medicine say is going on and what biomedicine and bioscience insists is going on, really, quote, really going on. And how do you, I think what you're talking about is trying to leap that gap. That's certainly what I'm talking about, because I would like American people to have more options in medical care. But this business have got to document it. I couldn't agree more, unfortunately, and that's because of the character of our society that doesn't like case histories, but wants to do RCTs, clinical trials, and then get it into the lab and do this and that in the lab and prove things. You can't prove in science, but many scientists are not very well trained. Don't hang me for saying that. Okay, so we want to
just one, Claire, excuse me for interrupting. This is only one kind of science.
I know.
I think they have a monopoly on what science is.
Exactly right. I quite agree with you. So, I recently have been finding biomedicine is a bit of a mess right now, and they're trying to understand what happened. And of course, one of the things is they're discovering that they're doing study after study after study, always RCTs, on the same subject. And they get the same answer every time. Or they get involved in why are we not getting the same answer every time? So this article is on uncertainty. When do you finally say, we have enough information, let's put this into the clinic? Right? Yeah. And we're not there with that. There yet with acupuncture, which is my specialty, but I know a lot about shamanic treatment as well. And you were talking about the transport business. You used a word, special word, which is for me just healing at a distance and can be explained with quantum physics quite easily. But it's still too strange to biomedicine, which is so materialistic. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know myself. I can't answer these questions. I bring them up and put them in the book and essentially lay it out for people to explain the gap and finally get around to saying, hey, let's use this gap. It's not really a gap. It's a different point of view that is pragmatic, and let's use it. But anyway, that's how I'm responding to what you're saying. I can hardly wait to read Spirits with Scalpels.
Okay. Yeah, let me ask you, when you complete this book, where are you going to try to get it published?
Aha, right.
And I'm saying this for another reason, because we continue to publish with academic publishers.
Yeah, I'm not writing for
that
academic.
That means a handful of people besides libraries actually read this stuff.
Right. No.
And the question becomes, and Alice knows this better than most, that how do we get our stuff out so that a popular audience reads them the way anthropologists started a century ago? And that's a problem.
You write as a journalist, not as an academic. I can barely read academic stuff anymore. It is so boring.
Yep.
And I've dropped out of organizations that sound like they ought to be good, but when they write, it's so opaque. They are really trying to say something useful, but can't get there. Well, lay people, I'm afraid after all, but lay people are not going to get there. So how do you write? You write like a journalist. That's what I'm doing. And you try to get a publisher who's a popular publisher, and think of Poland, who has published fantastic books. People are reading them. He's a multimillionaire because he wrote these books. My goal is not to be a multimillionaire. It's to get the message out. And I think anthropology has kind of messed up. When they write a popular book, it sells like crazy, but they keep putting it in academic places. So I am going to try and get it to a publisher who is widely read, widely sold and widely read. And it is such a book that it could also be used in the training of medical practitioners. The term means to me any form of medical practitioner. When I want to talk about biomedicine, I say biomedicine or biomedical practitioners. So it could be used in an acupuncture training school, in a chiropractic school, a biomedical school. I really doubt that shamanic practitioners would want to read this book, but hey, why not? Because it really is offering people options for their own self-care. And that's the last chapter. It's advocacy, trying to help patients develop some sense of agency for themselves, and therefore lay off the skepticism and try the new thing. Okay, that's me spieling, but anyway, I'm excited by this book, and I want to find a publisher who's excited by this book. If you have some ideas, please pass them on.
Well, Claire, I would love to see if you're willing to send me. I'd like to look at it to see how it's unfolding, because it's something that's important to me. And Dennis, isn't this the kind of thing that you're really trying to do? Just a lead into your question?
Yes, yes. Sid knows my line where I'm going here. And so just recently, we formed a new special interest group within the Society for Medical Anthropology on health professional education, special interest group. And so it was approved last November for the Society for Medical Anthropology. We have about 180 people already from around the world, but we don't have the webpage built yet. So we're all just communicating with a listserv, Google. But what you're talking about, Claire, is very relevant to our group, because what we're trying to do is having health anthropologists who have been they're health professionals, or anthropologists who are trying to influence health professionals. So some of the reasons that you gave for putting your book together actually is the purpose of our interest group. And so perhaps we can have you, join us on this journey, but also, express to, the members of our special interest group what you're up to, and we can, create an event or something, and they can give you feedback, from these various health professions.
Dennis, maybe we could do a Zoom thing and invite Claire to outline the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, as I said, I'm also an acupuncturist, which is a considerable training, but I'm retired, and from practicing with patients, although today I was in the midst of doing exactly that. But so I'm a medical anthropologist / human biologist. And
yes.
So I'm not
Excuse me.
trained, as some of you are in cultural anthropology, right?
Excuse me,
I read
this
it.
is Alice. It's getting late. I just wanted to say two quick things. One, getting to a trade publisher is getting extremely difficult. They demand that you have a literary agent bring your manuscript, and if you don't have an agent, they will absolutely not consider looking at you at all. Plus, agents say academics, professors can't write, goodbye. No, we don't want to look at it. I speak from long experience, and it's gotten a lot worse. Secondly, and this is the main thing I wanted to point out, the Roman Catholic Church is against faith healers outside the church.
Good luck.
They are very strict. They put local, this is in Milwaukee again, local faith healers here in Southside Milwaukee have to do penance. Like every week they go to confession and they confess they could not resist this poor person pleading for help. And the priest confessor says, oh dear, you have fallen again. You must do so and so many Hail Marys and don't do it again. And this goes on week after week after week. So the Roman Catholic Church, and that is certainly universal globally, is trying to control this use of mediums who aren't saints. Thanks, sorry.
Well, they can go ahead and try to control it. They're not going to succeed.
Yeah.
I think that's been their history since their founding.
Yes.
Yeah,
To
I
make
mean,
people
they
suffer?
grew straight out of shamanic practice, and then they put the shamanic practice into the hands of a handful of powerful people and created a hierarchy instead of having the far more horizontal relationship of a shamanic practitioner and patient and village or community. They took this
and there we sit in the modern world with the Roman Catholic Church trying to be very modern, and we are sitting here saying there are other worlds that are important that they don't care about.
Whereas this MD back in Portugal in the 1890s was definitely Catholic. He was most definitely Catholic. But look, he had that label after he was trained as a biomedical practitioner. Mm-hmm. So whatever he did was okay. I mean, there's a lot of irony in here and a tremendous amount of politics.
Coincidentally, just 2 weeks ago, I watched the film on Netflix, Kardec. Had that history of his life, and he really had a confrontation with the Catholic Church. They were burning his books and everything.
Wait a minute.
Kardec is just his last name. That's the name of the film.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Thank you.
Very well done. You know, I had limited knowledge beforehand, but that really brought me up to date to understand what Sidney's talking about today.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Well, we have time for a couple more comments or questions. Anyone want to add anything to the conversation? Yeah, please. You're muted.
Ralph, you're muted.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure that you're aware of that healer in Brasilia called João de Deus, who was subsequently either declared a fraud or for alleged sexual assaults on some of the patients.
Yeah.
Did he have anything to do with spiritual healing?
Yeah, he came out of a Cardicist background.
Oh.
And for well, I visited him many years ago, and you know, actually, when I visited him, I brought with me a couple of medical doctors.
Oh.
Who observed him, or at least one was an anthropologist who went to medical school, and his son, who was trained as an MD.
Right.
And they were a little, their minds were boggled by what they saw. And, actually it was input from them that went into my own research and the book.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, you're right. He was, every one of these healer mediums is referred to as a fraud, especially by the medical profession. And I remember they had great difficulty dealing with Edson Quiroz, the first medium that I studied, because he actually was trained as a medical doctor. So they couldn't bring him up on charges of practicing medicine without a license, which is what they usually do, and close them down. And whenever I visited the medical offices, they told me that, yes, we have an investigation going on. It's like an investigation of Donald Trump. It takes 20 years, and it still goes on. But they never came up with anything about any of his patients getting sick, getting infected, or anything else.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, outside.
Yes, my name is Said Al-Aswad. I'm from Michigan here. And I have a question related to the spirit. Beyond, medical anthropology, is there any kind of experience you have that the spirit interferes in, for example, social problem, wife-husband problem, or economic problem, or in dream, something like that, to be a little bit broader in perspective?
Yeah.
In addition to medical, of course, anthropology. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, what I did in this paper, and much of my research has been with respect to healing. And the answer to your question is that Brazilians go to these spirits with what the larger word is problema, a problem. Whatever it is, if you have a problem that's not working out, you turn to a supernatural being and ask for help. When you turn to the saints, as Ralph pointed out, there are lots of different saints that you can turn to, and the saints are specialized in doing different things for people. But it's the same process that you go through. And the same thing is true in terms of my own research with the Cardicists, with the evangelicals, with all of the other popular religious groups. You go with a problem and you ask the supernaturals to help you. And that is really much broader, which answers your question, essentially.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, we've just reached the end of our time, so I'd like to thank you all for attending, and in particular, I'd like to thank Sid for an interesting and stimulating discussion and presentation, right? Yay, Sid. So we're looking forward to this research you're going to be reporting on 11 years from now. What was that? I can't remember where you're going next.
Yes, if I live long enough to do comparisons, yes.
You're being challenged. So thank you all. We will have another First Friday, our last First Friday of the academic year in May. Look for an announcement about the theme and all of that kind of stuff. Thank you all for coming. You guys contribute to a fabulous event. I will stop the recording now.